All right, welcome everybody from around the great state. This is John Moore, and I work with the Professional Development Center as part of the Department of Administration. We do training in a variety of areas related to management, communication, and so the Developmental Disabilities Program asked me to put this together with regard to the support broker's responsibilities in assisting the self-directed participant with hiring people and having people provide service to them. That's a big job for the support broker. So we're going to do the game of work. And the way we'll work this over the course of the day, and we'll take some breaks as we go along, I know it's difficult to sit there for an extended period of time, is to assign certain parts of each of those sections to the groups, depending upon where you are, and Bozeman will bear a strong responsibility as the sole participant there, but that's fine, and provide some information back to the rest of us. So we're going to be interacting across the different locations where you are in order to cover this material, including the folks here in Helena. And as we get to, if you'll move to that first page beyond the cover, page 2, we want you to have some fun with this. We also want discussion around any of the issues that come up. We're going to be covering a lot of areas. You notice that those game tiles were named Know the Rules, How to Hire. I'm going to try to avoid the oops corner, but there may be questions that come up related to that, so we'll talk about that. Managing work and dealing with problems. So overall we have those 5 sections to cover, and in each of those we have 6 different topics or subsections of that to look at. So you probably wondered why you have that picture of the spinner on the cover, and on that on the subsequent pages such as page 3. What I'm going to do is assign those sections, subsections in each of the game spots to locations, whether it's Billings or Bozeman or Butte or Great Falls or Missoula or here in Helena. And you'll have a little bit of time to read through the information, discuss it with each other. Bozeman, you'll have to work alone, but you can talk to yourself, we won't listen. And be able to report out a couple of things on that. What I'll ask you to report on each one of those, and if you just think of this, 5 important points on that page, if there's a lot of information. And then there's usually a couple of questions on each page that ask for an answer. So, and I'll be explaining this more as we go along and go through it, but I want your participation rather than just sit there and listen to me, which is not a real interesting thing to do all day long. You'll be listening to each other and learning from each other with regard to some of these areas. Because as I mentioned, those are important aspects. Knowing the rules, we're going to talk about the rules around employment. Because the self-directed participant will be an employer, hiring people to provide services. The support broker will be assisting with that and should be able to advise that participant on the rules. And just some of the things to be aware of as you go along. Then that also how to hire. The participant will need to hire those direct service folks. And we'll go through aspects of that. Managing work is just doing the day-to-day, working with an employer, helping the employer work with employees. So that self-directed participant has to get used to that role as an employer of a few folks that are going to be providing services to him or her. And of course problems always arise when you're working with people. It's just normal. We'll be looking at aspects of performance issues, discipline, dealing with conflict, excuse me, and possibly even discharge. So you may have a lot of questions. I look forward to those, and we can talk about some of those issues. You notice that definition on the first part of middle of page 2. A support broker is a person who helps the participant or authorized representative obtain and manage self-directed services and supports. Except in specific cases, they need to obtain the services of a support broker. So it's a participant and family both, if family is involved. The DD program certifies each support broker. That's what Kathy was talking about at the beginning of the day. who has distinct duties separate from those of the case manager. So as she mentioned, support broker is not making decisions, the support broker is providing assistance and advice. And they provide only as much service as the planning team agrees upon. So I think it's an important role, it's an important job, and as mentioned up above, it has a big effect on another person's life. So the training is real important. You've invested your time here today and tomorrow to go through a lot of that and get the information that you need, so obviously you understand the importance of it too. We're going to be moving fast. It isn't a real slow game because we have a lot to cover in the time that we have. We're slated to be complete with this section of the training by 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we will have breaks, and of course a lunch break. You will get to go to lunch. Some of you will be playing in small groups. I noticed that you have just a couple people in Missoula and 3 in Butte, and then pretty large groups in Billings and Great Falls. Bozeman's got to feel lonely, but that's okay. You'll do fine, I'm sure. Especially we want to try to avoid that oops corner. If you look at the next page, page 3, you know, the game of work involves a lot of rules. And I don't think anyone knows all those rules. I work here in Helena within state government, so there are a lot of lawyers. In fact, we did some training last week for state attorneys, and there was 100 of them there, and that was only about 75% of the total number of lawyers employed by the state. That just seems goofy. That's a lot of lawyers. And not one of them knows all the rules about work. But there are some areas that are very specific to self-direct and are important for support brokers. So what I'm going to do, as we go through, you'll notice that there are different labels for each of those colors on the wheel. This is the wheel. We have the spinner here. Now when you're looking at this page, hopefully you all can see page 3. It looks like a wheel with some words around it. Is that right? I hope so. If not, let me know. Toggle in. But we're going to give pages 4 and 5 in the handout to Great Falls. Page 6 will be to Missoula. That's on managing. 4 and 5 is on legal. Page 7 will be to Bozeman, and if that doesn't work out, we'll just deal with it separately. Page 8 goes to Butte. Page 9 here in Helena, and page 10, the trivia one, goes to Billings. So that's 4, 5. I hope you see this paging through. And that's quite a bit of information to cover. So we'll probably spend a little bit of time on that. Some of the legal issues related to employment, along with some questions at the top of page 5, a couple of other things to go through, and managing the work on page 6, training on page 7. I'll leave it there. I hope that Bozeman will be able to read that. Perhaps you can enlarge the screen there where you are. Page 8 being records, page 9 status, and this was just the luck of the draw for Helen. I didn't give them the easy page on purpose. And page 10, some of the trivia for the folks in Billings to take a look at. So what you'll do, as mentioned, with that information that you have and what you're looking at, is to do some reading of that, talk it over. What are 5 important points, if there are that many? You don't have to come up with 5, but if I know that on pages 4 and 5 there'll be several. And also be able to report out on the questions that are on each one of those sections. So I'm going to be quiet here and let you folks discuss those issues that were assigned to you. Marcia, I'm sorry, I hope you get that handout soon, and we'll work from there. Thank you. So we're going to start, if you'll move to page 4, and Bozeman should have the handout soon. We've sent that over there. Just needs to be printed out. The legal issues, and Great Falls had that section, so I'm going to have you unmute, and somebody just needs to be a spokesperson. What are the 5 points you figured that were most important off that first page, and then we'll move to the second one because that was more of the questions to answer.
We listed that the main legal issue is to avoid discrimination, and then the 3 different types of illegal discrimination were, say it wrong, desperate. I don't know how I'm disparate. I always say desperate.
Yeah.
Adverse impact and harassment. Do you want me to go into detail about each one?
No, you'll be fine.
Okay.
If we have questions, we'll go into them.
And then the last thing was retaliation, that there should be no retaliation.
Okay. And if there are any questions on those types of discrimination, we can talk it over. But let's take a look at page 5. You already mentioned in that what are the 3 types of discrimination. What are the protected classes?
Race, religion, color, age, national origin, marital status, mental or physical disability, and gender.
Okay. And one other that I would add to that, which is part of the policy of the state of Montana, is sexual orientation, although it's not covered under Montana or federal law. And then that third question, if an employee suffers for complaining about discrimination.
That's the retaliation.
Okay. One thing I would note, and not that I expect legal complaints come out of this, but a lot of this takes place through the Department of Labor and Industry, which has the Human Rights Bureau there. So they receive discrimination complaints legally, and they have to proceed through that. And retaliation is a big area. Even, in fact, here's one case, just as didn't have anything to do with a disability service or anything like that, but there was a person working for a nonprofit who it was a woman who was in the management of that small nonprofit group in Billings, and they had put out for their employees, a small group of employees, a new harassment policy. So one of the employees was rather curious and came to the manager and said, this hostile work environment, which is part of possible harassment, what does that mean? So she described it a little bit more, and the employee said, well, I think I might have that with one of the other co-workers. So the manager said, well, put your information together and I'll take it to the director just to make him aware of the problem. And she did that. And then when the manager took it to the director, he just kind of came unglued. He said, well, it's not your job to do this, blah, blah, and really thought that she was out of line for bringing that issue forward on behalf of an employee. And eventually, at some point, presented false information to the board of that nonprofit, and she got fired. So even though she was not suffering from the harassment or any other form of discrimination, it was illegal retaliation for that to take place. And so when somebody brings up an issue, it's normal to kind of react to that, and I think support brokers have to be very clear with the self-direct participants that if somebody complains about an issue that's remotely related to discrimination and bringing up that issue, then they should not retaliate against them in any way, whether it's reducing their hours or letting them go or giving them a bunch of lousy work assignments, especially outside the job description. So there's something to be real careful of. Any other questions related to those types of discrimination or the issues there? Feel free to bring them up.
That's a fair question.
I always give an uncomfortable pause here because it takes sometimes it takes a little bit of time to think up those questions. Okay, another thing that Great Falls had on the bottom of page 5, and I'm hoping you can see the content, were those questions.
On the questions.
Yeah.
Yep, on the questions. The first one is, in a job interview, an employer asks for a date of birth. That is not an okay question.
Okay.
On the second one, the interviewer asks an applicant with severe allergies whether they'd be able to do a cleaning job with reasonable accommodations. That is an appropriate question.
Yes.
On the third one, a job application form on whether the person is legally eligible to work in this country. On a job application, that is okay.
Yes, it is.
An employer fires an Indian employee for excessive absences, but other employees with similar missed days are still working. That is not okay.
Okay, you're right.
A participant kiddingly refers to an older employee as a grandma. That is not okay.
Correct.
In their home, when an employee is working, the participant has a Playboy calendar on his living room wall. That is okay.
All right, well, I have a question about that. What led you to come to that decision?
Because you are working in a client's home. It is their environment. It is their right to have the decor that they want to. And so therefore, that just happens to be their choice, and you are an employee there.
Because you can, I suppose you could ask if it's offensive that it be taken down while you're there or covered up or something, but it is their home. I don't know that we have the right to ask them to change what's in their home.
All right, any other points of view from other areas?
They're adults, it's legal.
Pardon?
They're an adult, it's legal to have that.
It's a place of employment.
I
don't know if you were at the state office and Jeff Sturm had a Playboy calendar on his wall, would that be okay? It's a place of employment.
No,
I don't
not.
think so.
Yeah.
It's not a private home.
It's a home.
It's still a place of employment.
This is a tough question. I mean, I understand the point of view. It's a private home. The person has the right to their own personal decor, and yet they are employing somebody. It is a place of employment.
I don't know. In all the training I've ever had, I've always been told it's in their home and we can't ask them to take things out of their home. We can choose not to be an employee, but we cannot ask to have them take things out. I don't know.
I agree.
And in this area, I haven't seen a case which looks directly at that issue. Every time the aspect has come up legally of, well, it's the employer's own place. And none of those have involved a private home, but it's the employer's own place. The courts have said that doesn't matter. You're asking employees to come in. And one of the points of view that has been brought up before, this was within a federal court of appeals, was, well, that's just the environment. They have to get used to it. And there's plenty of sexually oriented or other sorts of racially oriented materials out in the world. But the court says, well, people can choose whether to be exposed to that. If they want to watch it on TV or hear it on the radio or read it in a magazine. But in the workplace, it's somewhat captive, is the way they put it. It's an environment that the employee doesn't have control over, and so those sorts of materials should not be displayed. The question of whether in a private home that's acceptable or not has not been settled, to my knowledge. What I would advise the support broker to do is talk it over with a participant and say, is it possible or appropriate to remove that or place it in an area where the employee's not going to be exposed to it. Inside of a closet, I mean, there's lots of possible opportunities, but it's a tough area. Any other points of view? I'm willing to hear what folks have to say.
I think in the current system with providing supported living, the provider is the employer in that situation. So I think where folks are coming from, it is the place where that person lives, but that person may not be that person's employee. Where with self-direct, they are the employee, so it changes that environment.
Yeah, with self-direct, the participant is the employer. and the person coming in to provide service is the employee. The question with the exposure to materials like that is whether it possibly presents a hostile work environment.
And it also, in my mind, begs a question regarding the right to expression in the participant as well, because it is their home. And so that's where it becomes really sticky, and there really is a need for some accommodation to be worked out, and as I see it. You know, and I certainly could be wrong here, but the client, the participant has a right to expression as long as it does not break the law. And so that's what other people have brought up. But because of this sticky situation with the employer having to have a workplace that is not hostile to the individual, then that's where I start seeing a need for accommodations.
Accommodation on the part of the employee or the employer?
The employer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, part of the, so what Kathy's saying, accommodation on the part of the employer would be to remove those materials possibly while the employee's in the home.
Or put it in some place where they don't have to see it all the time.
Yeah. This area of harassment and other areas of discrimination is one where I do a lot of training, and so I have to read a lot of the cases, particularly in Montana, and it really honestly hasn't come up. And I'm not hoping that somebody here wants to make a test case out of it. That's often no fun.
Wouldn't that be a part of a support broker's job in helping the participant to hire someone that would match their likes and dislikes? Because I think it's different when the provider agency is hiring than if the person is hiring for themselves, and it seems like it would almost be a part of their interview process, talking about, this is the environment I have, are you a good match?
Well, I think the problem with that is then we get into a form of discrimination based on a person's personal preferences rather than their ability to do the job. You know, whether the person is able to abide by a Playboy calendar in the residence should not be a condition of employment. I just don't see that that's going to fly very well if it's under review. I see the point, and you want a good match between employee and employer, but I wouldn't condition it on that sort of thing, that they find it acceptable or okay to have that sort of material displayed. I think the support broker's job would be to provide some advice to the employer, the participant, about what these sorts of materials might constitute in terms of a hostile work environment. I mean, the participant gets to make his or her own choice. And what I'm interested in is reducing the risk of problems that could come down the line. I'm on number 8. I'm sorry, number 7.
Can I do 7 first?
Yeah, number 7.
Okay, number 7. A participant refuses to hire a person that they think is lesbian. That is not okay. Number 8, when an employer finds out an employee is Mormon, she kids him a lot about it. That's not okay. And number 9, a participant opens the door for an employee coming in, then brushes her body as she comes in, and that is not okay.
All right, very good. Any questions on any of those areas?
How do you determine that some of these, like the number 9, how do you determine that brushing against the body is not done accidentally?
Oh, the question here is how do you determine that under number 9 that's not done accidentally, which it may very well be. Although usually that's the first excuse people bring up.
And for the harassment, going back to number 5, is just something that's listed as a harassment, a joke or something, doesn't it have to be perceived as harassing by the person who hears it, or for it to be harassment?
So the question here was back on number 5, referring to grandma. If it's, you know, joking, that sort of thing, doesn't have to be perceived by the other person as harassment, which is true. And here's what happens a lot of times: people, you know, they kind of grin and bear it for a while until they find it no longer bearable. And whether it's illegal harassment, that is, you know, does it cross over the line? Now, I don't want to get into all the fine points of the legalities of it, but when it really is pervasive and repetitive, that sort of thing, it can cross over the line into illegal harassment. The way I often look at it for folks is, if it's a problem for somebody, then it's not the right thing to do. You know, we don't need to worry about the legalities of it. It's just better not to engage in the sorts of behaviors that refer to a protected class, such as age here, or religion in number 8, or race, as we looked at in the number 4, is just to have an interaction with employees that doesn't refer to those protected classes. One thing about, you know, jokes and so forth, I think we all have experienced times when we've been in a group of people and somebody tells a joke that we find offensive, or some reference that we find offensive, but there's still a lot of pressure to kind of laugh and go along with that. And it's, even though nobody says, here's what you must do, laugh and go along with it, is that we kind of feel that way. I'll give you another example, a real life example. And it involved a state agency where, at a remote location where there was an office set up to do some work, and there was a project management crew there, 3 men and 2 women. Well, one of the guys put up a pinup. And the women kind of went, well, we can play that game too. So they put up one on the other side of the room. Kind of a long, narrow room. The guys put up another one, the women put up another one. Pretty soon the whole place was papered with these pinups. And we had female pinups on one side for the guys and male pinups on the other side for the women. And then the manager came by one day and said, oh my gosh, take this stuff down. But it was one of the guys that came to him and said, oh, I'm glad you did that. I mean, I was really uncomfortable from the get-go. Well, if he was uncomfortable with that display in the workplace, why didn't he say something? And I think we all know the answer is that, you know, then he's going to be the wet blanket, the party pooper, the stick in the mud that doesn't want to be in that group. So kind of going along with it even though it was very uncomfortable for him. So sometimes people don't say anything even though they may be uncomfortable or offended by the activity. So my point is often it's better not to engage in the activity. Any other questions related to the legal issues?
John, I had one. Would it be appropriate as a support broker, if there was an issue with the number 6, for instance, with the Playboy, to talk with your participant about maybe some things in their environment that may be offensive to their workers, and identify those things, and so then when they are talking with employees, they state these are some potential things that you may be exposed to, thank you, in your work environment, and kind of just have that discussion before they hire somebody, to kind of get it in the air and to talk about those issues. Is that something you would encourage us to do?
And that was kind of the question brought up a little earlier out of Billings, is do we say, well, here's what's going to be there, I hope you're comfortable with that. And if the person says no, does that mean they don't get the job? And if they don't get the job because of that, is it really saying, unless you're willing to essentially deal with something that's uncomfortable for you, of a sexual nature or a racial nature, whatever, then you wouldn't get the job? I think that's very problematic. Could be a big problem. What I would advise the support broker to do is tell the person, you know, these sorts of displays could be a problem for somebody working for you. And they may not let you know directly.
Right.
And I wouldn't necessarily put it on the line that they have to be able to deal with it in order to work for you. Does that make sense?
Right. Right, yeah, but just to start that discussion anyway, and help that person, the participant, understand that those things are an issue. Could potentially be an issue.
Yeah, help the participant to understand that. Yes, that would be
Yeah.
great.
I have a question. What kind of liability, I don't even know if that's the correct word, but you're in somebody's home and let's say somebody, a family member comes over and makes a discriminatory remark or makes a person, their employee make uncomfortable. So what kind of liability does the actual employer have in that situation when it's being in the home, in that place of employment?
Okay, I hope everybody can hear that question, but I'll paraphrase it for clarity, is that what kind of liability would the participant, as the employer, have for somebody else coming in, a family member, and making some sort of discriminatory remark about the employee? Well, it is the employer's location, and there can be a possible liability for the harassment or discrimination from an outside party. You know, there have been employers where, you know, the coworkers, family members have come into the workplace and created problems, or outside contractors and that sort of thing. So it would be the participant's responsibility to talk to their family member, if that were the person, and tell them, you know, I really don't want that. I don't want my employee exposed to that. And I know this is all difficult because you're dealing with family relationships, you're dealing with difficult communication, and sometimes issues that are hard to grasp for everybody. So by saying the potential liability, I really don't think there's going to be, you know, a lawsuit arising out of that, if you want to just call a discrimination complaint that. But rather that it could make somebody uncomfortable, could create some problems for the employee and then the employment relationship.
Now, I think it has more to do with what did the employer do. If it's one instance and the employer says, you know, this isn't something that I want you doing to my employee, then that's good, and they've taken care of their situation. If they don't try to deal with the situation and it continues, then I think we do have a real problem of liability for creating a hostile workplace. And at least, you know, from my experience, that's where it comes down, is that if the instance occurs and you do something about it and then it reoccurs, what else did you do? How did you protect your employee?
Yes. How did you protect your employee? And you know, it used to be, and this is all an evolving field, that if the employer had not received a complaint, so the employee didn't say, you know, I really don't like that your sister called me that. If the employer didn't receive a complaint, then they didn't have an issue to deal with. That's no longer the case. If the employer, and this is the participant as the employer, is aware of the possibly discriminating behavior, then he or she has a responsibility to deal with it, to address that with that family member or friend or whoever it was that came into the workplace and did that. If they do so, then they're fine. Then they're fine. And if it occurs again, to deal with it again. I mean, you hate to take extreme measures, but it may be necessary for the participant to tell a family member, well, while my employee is here, you can't be. If they, you know, if you're going to continue with that behavior, and maintain some control over the workplace for the safety of the employee, if you want to put it that way, the safety or the comfort or the respect for the employee. Okay, thank you. We're going to move to the page 6. And managing the work. This was Missoula, the couple folks there that dealt with this. I'm willing to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, well, this was about managing the work and knowing the rules about that. The questions down at the bottom are, what's a key document that guides employees' work schedule and work tasks? And we felt that that was a job description.
Job description is very key, you're right. But you would also need to take a look at the plan of care.
Oh, the plan of care.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, great. What if an employee doesn't show up for work? They talked here about a workable backup plan, and that would need to be maybe a list at the participant's house of backup resources, numbers to call, etc.
Very good, very good. And a little bit, and later on today we'll be talking about dealing with problems, because if the person doesn't show up, I mean, there may be a legitimate reason, a legitimate emergency, but the employer needs to talk it over with that employee. But having the backup plan, you're on the right track there.
Okay, great. And who needs to approve any hiring before work begins? That would be your fiscal agent, which would need to do all that kind of stuff, the I-9s, the background checks, etc.
Yes.
And so I guess all of that would have to come back to being okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then who needs to know if an employee has an on-the-job injury or gets fired? That would, again, be the fiscal agent.
You're right.
Because I assume that fiscal agent is going to be carrying workers' comp and all that on the employee of the participant.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. On behalf of the participant, for the employees, you're right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Great job.
All right.
Great job. Any questions about managing the work? And
No.
we also have a whole section on managing the work, so we'll be talking more about this, but that gets at those fundamental responsibilities of the participant. Okay, we'll move to page 7, and this is the one where that Bozeman's going to be looking at, and since she didn't have the handout, this deals with training. I took that on because it's an area very dear to my heart. I do training all the time. And it's very an important part of having successful employment. I think making sure that both the participant and the employee have taken part in training is, well, as Kathy pointed out, it's a requirement. So the areas of training that the self-direct participants need. One of those, and I think that the support broker is going to be important in helping get this information to participants, helping them find the training that's necessary, or even providing some of that training. Hiring, arranging schedules, that takes some thought, some skill, managing employees, and solving problems that come up. So hiring is one, and that's an important area we'll be looking at in the next section. Arranging schedules for the employee or employees. Managing with that person, and managing is a cooperative thing, and solving problems. Now, employees for self-direct participants have some training responsibilities too. And among those that you have listed, I'll point out the ones we want to check. The first one, first aid certification. The third one, safety at home and in the community. The next one, 4, individual rights and choice. And the last 2 in that list, maltreatment of vulnerable adults and children, documentation and confidentiality of documentation. So those will be overall training topics for the employees. We will also be talking about other training on the job so that they're doing the proper work for the self-direct participant. Where will employees get nearly all that required training? Well, you've talked about that a lot for support brokers already. It's also would be part of employees training, the College of Direct Supports, that online training that Kathy talked about earlier this morning.
And employers will have the ability to be an administrator in the College of Direct Supports and assign the training in the College of Direct Supports. So I will be opening administrator accounts for all the employers as people begin to self-direct.
So those self-direct employers will be able to help their employees get their training online through the College of Direct Supports.
Kathy, what about first aid certification? Can you get certified through College of Direct Supports?
No, but there are online certifications through the American Heart Association, and also some through the American Red Cross has regular sessions in most communities. So first aid CPR certification can be obtained within the community.
Who would then pay for that?
That would be the responsibility of the employee, or the employer can pay for it, but it won't come out of their Medicaid funds.
All right?
Kathy?
Yes.
We may have missed this earlier, but is there a time frame with which that first aid certification needs to be completed? Do they have to have it within like 30 days or before they're hired?
All training requirements need to be completed within 30 days.
Okay.
And that includes the first aid CPR. I'm looking at Laura
Thanks.
just to make sure that I'm saying the correct thing about first aid CPR, but
Not CPR, just first aid.
I'm sorry,
First aid and College of Direct Supports.
right.
Yep.
Not CPR. But first aid and college direct supports within 30 days of hire.
Great. Okay.
So they don't have to have CPR.
No. Just first aid.
All right, any other questions? We're going to move to page 8, and that was the Butte folks taking a look at records. And we'll go to those questions that you had in the green box.
Okay. What are the two categories of records? You have service records, which are the services provided, i.e. if you have, say for instance, a sign language teacher or a life skills coach, and then your employee records, which would be your timesheets. What if a payroll record isn't correct? Then you have to report that to your fiscal agent so that they can correct any errors. If you have more than one respite provider and there's an overlap or something of that nature, what's one type of service record that employees will complete? You have things like your progress notes. Say for instance, the sign language teacher will provide a periodic report on how the individual is progressing. Name 3 of the 4 elements in the record keeping requirements. Access, as to who has the ability to access the records, the federal, state, and local agencies, so that they can inspect and evaluate the records. Retention, which records and how long they have to be kept for. 5-year for all your employee records, such as your timesheets, and an 8-year period for all of your service records. Maintenance, keeping them active records accessible and keeping your inactive records stored securely. And then the last one is confidentiality, so that employee information is released only with written permission of the employee.
All right, great job, Butte, that was wonderful.
And it is very important to keep your employee records separate from your participant records. Because as people are doing their service records, they should not be able to access any employee information. So it's very important that you keep both kinds of records very secure but separate.
And it would be important for the support broker to help the participant understand that and even set up those arrangements for keeping records separate. And one of the things you did mention, the one type of service record that employees will complete would be, as you mentioned, progress notes. And I think the support broker would be kind of the advisor for that, make sure the good progress notes are there by the service provider, the employee. Any other questions on records?
Yes, do you have a
Out of billing?
question? Missoula.
Okay, Missoula,
I
go first.
pressed it twice. The question is those records, are they kept at the participant's house?
Yes, they are the employer. And so the employer maintains their own records. So records can be stored and kept in lock boxes. They can be kept in a locked closet, those sort of situations. A very handy way of doing it would be to have a lockbox for each, the service records and the employee records, and have the employee records stored separately from the service records. That's just a very simple way of doing that, so that they're in the house, they're accessible, but they're not necessarily together.
Thank you.
Again, that's a good question. Billy?
I just wanted to know if it was the support broker's responsibility to make sure that the service records were adequate or would meet Medicaid requirements, or whose responsibility is it to make sure that those things, that not just a time card is being filled in and sent into a fiscal intermediary, that there really are service notes documenting what went on or something? Whose responsibility is that?
Well, it is actually the employer's responsibility at the end. You know, the employer is taking on the responsibility for making sure all of this happens. There are other service entities involved, so the support broker would be one that could be assisting with making sure that those are complete. There also has to be oversight by the case manager, by other entities such as the QIS, the follow-through on the quality assurance parts of it. So there will be that dialogue that will go on, but the bottom line responsibility is the employers. And that's why you have the support services that are involved to assist the person in making sure that they are complete. Does that make sense?
When you think of the term support broker, that's a big part of it, is providing that support. The employer has a big job. And the self-direct participant would, just may not be on top of all that, as any employer. So having some assistance to recall, remember, make sure that things happen is important. And as Kathy mentioned, records, I think, is a big part of that. Having those records in the home, secure, say, separate for service and employee. And I think the support broker is going to play a big role in making sure that it's there and it's organized well. I mean, we all know how we tend to keep our own records. You're probably sorting through your shoe boxes now trying to get stuff for your tax returns. It's just doing it the right way.
And that is a part of this discussion that the planning teams will have. If the participant themselves is not really capable of managing the employer authority, that's where the representative comes in. They can have a representative to take on that employer authority, but it has to be unpaid. But that's where a lot of families provide the employer authority and take on the role of the employer. So a parent may take that on. A friend, it can be anyone that the planning team agrees is is a good representative. So as people, if the participant themselves struggle with this situation and taking on all of the responsibilities, it doesn't mean they can't self-direct and they can't have employer authority. It means that they may need a representative, and I think we all know that.
Billings?
I just wanted to clarify, is the representative then the employer authority, or is the participant still the employer authority, but just with someone else helping them? Who is the employer of record then?
The employer of record, it can be the person that the participant has agreed would represent them. So in the case of a child, it would be the parent.
Okay.
All right. Good question. Anything else?
In Great Falls, I was wondering if there's a format for the reports that are required or the records that are required from the fiscal agent. Would they provide that?
Oh, turn out over to
Progress
that. I
notes.
think a large part of it's going to be recommendations from the fiscal agent, but
Progress notes.
Progress
not the progress notes. Yeah.
There are specific forms that the fiscal agent requires. There will be sufficient forms that, specific forms that DDP requires. However, progress notes, no. That is something that people can develop their own system of keeping their progress notes. Things that are less formal, the employer and their support system can work out a way of keeping those, as long as they make sure that the needed and essential information is transferred to the people who need it. So a progress note could be a notebook, it could be a computer log, it could be anything that people feel is adequate and works for them. It's not a requirement that it be in a specific format.
Thank you.
One of the things that we'll be also talking about today is documentation that the participant as the employer also keeps, or is assisted by the support broker or the representative of the participant, if we get into that type of relationship. All right, we're going to move through the rest
Can
of
I
the
ask one more question?
Okay.
Will the participants have access to Therap,
I just said that.
Yes,
the documentation program
Yes.
Therap?
yes.
Yes, they will.
Thank you.
All right, the next page, on page 9, status, we have folks here in Helena looking at that, so I'm going to have them report.
Okay. Well, we'll just go straight to the questions and who develops the plan of care. And that would be the individual or with a representative, could be a lot of relatives. Case manager develops a plan of care along with them. Any other of those team members, there could be professionals involved once in a while. It's those people who are most closely day-to-day working with the individual to help them develop those things that we're going to do to help them achieve their life goals over time. And what role might a support broker have with the plan of care? They will help with advising of how to make up those backup plans that are needed. They'll help with advising the individual about record keeping, daily budget formation. They may need to help with that. With anything that has to do with training needs for employees, whether or not, what type of employees are needed, and scheduling of those employees. A serious problem affecting Medicaid eligibility. One problem that's often comes up is the failure to do that redetermination report every 6 months that's necessary to maintain eligibility. Another one is whether or not the person pays that monthly increment if they have one, and whether or not the income is too high for them to be eligible for Medicaid. Or if they have any other insurance coverage that may be covered under another insurance plan somewhere, a private insurance plan, that could affect their eligibility.
Great.
Anything else?
It's good to have a case manager going over that stuff for us.
Questions, comments?
We enjoy that. Also, I think another role that the support broker has, making sure that the services that the employees provide are within that plan of care. If they're going to qualify for payment, then they have to remain within the plan of care. So the support broker will need to be familiar, very familiar with the plan of care and with the services that employees are providing. Another problem to watch out for, I mean, you brought out some great ones, would be fraud. That there not be some misrepresentation of service or employment status or any other aspect that would improperly obtain Medicaid funding.
And,
John, this is,
go ahead.
Good.
oh, I had one more question. Here, yes, in Billings here, we're having an awful lot of difficulty. Every time the Social Security system changes something, people are dropped off the OPA rolls. So we're having to deal with that all the time. Who would help a self-directed participant get that fixed?
Case manager.
Case managers in general. DDP can also assist, but it's primarily the role of the case manager.
Okay.
But what I started to also say, and it probably isn't as critical, but we did have someone, Mr. Watson did mention that the employee really needs to make sure that there isn't an overlap in timesheets, that people are not documenting that they have worked during hours that someone else has also worked, so that there's not a problem with fraud in that sense too. Acumen is very good at picking that up, but that's something also that the employer has the ultimate responsibility for too, is making sure that they're checking on that. And the support broker can help with that as well.
Great. Any other questions before we move to the last section, or last part of this section? On page 10. Here's some trivia. These were multiple choice, so we had Billings dealing with those. I want to find out what they thought the answers were to those.
All right, well, they're all looking at me, so I guess I have to read. So number one, to be eligible for self-direct with employer authority, a participant must be, we said D, all of the above.
That's correct.
Okay, and then for number two, which of these activities would a support broker not be responsible for? We said B. That would be a case manager that would develop and periodically revise the plan of care, specify goals and actions, and ensure active participation of the participant and others.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then for number three, we all kind of chuckled about this one for a little bit, but CMS is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Okay, that's good.
Not Custer's Mustard.
We were going to go with Custer's Mustard Stand. But and then for number four, true or false, we said none of the above.
Okay, that's correct. All right, thanks very much.
That's the weirdest thing.
Well, you've been in those chairs for a while, and I know that's not easy to do. So before we go to the next section, we're going to take 10 minutes, and I'll hold you to that. You have the time at the bottom of your screen. It says 10:30 now, so at 10:40 we'll go back online to take a look at the next section. Thanks. The next section, how to hire. This is an important area. I think the two most important things for hiring, and the first one is most important, is